While walking through this beautiful rural cemetery, Poplar Grove, I literally stumbled onto this stone that was well preserved and had the name James Hudson Grover carved in the state of Maine. The soldier, James Hudson Grover, was from a rural area of Waldo County. At age 16, the military records show he first enlisted in the United States Army with the 13th Maine. They, not long afterwards, shipped out to the southern United States, to Mississippi and New Orleans. And from there, his unit fought in the Battle of Baton Rouge in Louisiana in 1862. That was his first engagement. He was wounded in that battle, spent a long time recovering from the wound, and was eventually discharged from the service in October of 1862. His military history picks up again about a year later, when he volunteered, again another voluntary re-enlistment, this time with the 1st Maine Heavies. And this is in 1863. They were not involved in any battle action at that time. Instead, the 1st Maine Heavies were stationed in some of the forts around Washington, D.C. in the defense of Washington. That unit, that famous 1st Maine Heavy Artillery, basically spent the better part of 2 years not doing much other than walking around these forts in Washington. Eventually, as General Grant geared up his 1864 overland campaign in Virginia, the 1st Maine Heavies were eventually called into service to replace troops that had fallen, and were shipped down into Virginia and fought around the famous Spotsylvania Courthouse battle, specifically Harris Farm, which is near Spotsylvania. Big battle there. The 1st Maine Heavies, that was really, for most of them, their first engagement in battle. James Hudson Grover was again wounded in that battle of Harris Farm. He survived the wound, was shipped back to Washington for convalescence in 1864, so that by mid-September of 1864 he had recovered and was able to rejoin his unit, shipping off this time to City Point, Virginia, and eventually being transported to the Petersburg Western Front. Private Grover kept a personal diary, a small pocket field diary that was typical for Union forces. And in it, he kept a daily record of his activities. I obtained the diary from descendants, and they very graciously gifted me the diary, which I have studied extensively since then. Most of the entries are more matter-of-fact, day-to-day activities, the general boredom of being in the U.S. Army at that time. They talk about the weather, they talk about whether he's had plenty to eat, where he's finding food, whether he's on picket duty, whether he's being inspected. Many of the entries are like that. The more interesting ones are once he has reached the Western Front in Petersburg, what he's seeing around them.
September 4th, 1864. Today is my birth. 19 years old today. I am on picket today. This forenoon I went and got some apples of one of the neighboring farmers. Then we left for City Point.
Relatively short clips talking about cannon fire, picket duty, mentioning soldiers being wounded in his unit.
September 17th, 1864. Left City Point and arrived at the front this p.m. The pickets are firing briskly. Camp near Petersburg.
Soldiers being killed. There's an entry in there where a Confederate bullet went through his tent.
September 18th, 1864. This a.m. I wrote a letter, and a Reb bullet came through my tent. This p.m. I took a nap. One of the boys that came to the regiment with me last night got wounded through the side. Named Charlie. Rained tonight.
On October 2nd, the day they moved out for this battle, he had entered in his diary, October 2nd, 1864. That is where the diary ends. I wanted very much to follow his footsteps on October 2nd, 1864, which was the day of the battle that he fought in and was mortally wounded. Using diaries, records, historical records, could follow very precisely the path of the 1st Maine Heavies, which were part of the 9th Corps of the U.S. Army. His unit, with other units, was in the far left flank of the Union advance on that day. The purpose of the Union action that day was to hopefully capture these strong Confederate earthworks that were guarding Boynton Plank Road, which is now modern Route 1, which really Lee's last line of defense for Petersburg. So their purpose was to try and engage the Confederates along those earthworks on Boynton Plank Road, and if lucky, advance further west to the South Side Railroad, which was the only remaining link supplying Petersburg with supplies. Grover and the 1st Maine Heavies advanced along Harmon Road. That is where they first engaged the Confederates. Having heavy rain the night before and taking heavy fire that they didn't expected from these very impressive Confederate earthworks, the whole unit laid down in the muck and waited. In doing so, they were exposed for a while to heavy fire. Private Grover was mortally wounded by artillery fire exploding around him. October 2nd, 1864. That is where the diary ends. He obviously was not around to fill in the events of that day, but would have carried the diary with him during battle, would have been on his person at all times, and he would have been killed with the diary in his pocket. Through subsequent genealogy search, we discovered that my wife, on the maternal side of her family, are descendant from James Hudson Grover, and that they share a common ancestor back to the Revolutionary War.
Thanks for watching. And don't miss a single episode as we delve into the fascinating history of Maine's role in the Civil War. Please like and subscribe now.